It's been some time since the DLC came out, and I wanted time to play through it before giving out my opinion. And now, since time has actually passed, and I having played the main story, all the side content I could find, and even seeing all the POIs in the vicinity of the Varun Kai world tile, I believe I have thoroughly explored enough of the new content to know that it is good. Or at least I think it is good in the parameters I have set for the game to achieve. I wasn't expecting a well-written, philosophical, or even interesting story with the game, because that has never been the main focus of Bethesda for a while. That's not to say that Shattered Space sucks. In fact, there were some bright spots that I enjoyed. But the best way I can describe Shattered Space as a whole is that it is more of the same that you got from the base game. So if you enjoyed Starfield like I do, then I recommend you get the DLC because it's more Starfield. But if you dislike Starfield, then I wouldn't recommend getting the DLC because it's more Starfield. Unless you enjoy hate playing a game, then power to you. Before we go in any further, make sure to like the video and sub to me because I am always right, and hearing my factual opinions will benefit you and increase your life expectancy by about 10 to 20 years. The writing in this DLC is okay. I don't really play Bethesda games for the great storytelling. Usually the stories are nothing special at best and boring at worst. The value in playing a Bethesda game comes from all the dungeon crawling and how great the sandbox is. The appeal I get personally is that I can pretty much go anywhere I want and do anything I want. So if you go into the DLC looking to be told a deep, interesting story like Fallout New Vegas, KOTOR 2, or Cyberpunk 2077, that's like expecting to find a succulent Chinese meal at McDonald's. You gotta look elsewhere for that style of fine cuisine because the best you're going to get here is a McChicken. Since we are on the subject of writing though, I do wish with Shattered Space that they delved more into the great houses of Varun than they did, preferably as factions like in Morrowind with House Telvanni, House Redoran, and House Halu. Because I feel that Bethesda doesn't really make good main stories. I believe their strength is making factions and side quests. There were some bright spots in the main quest of Shattered Space, like the space station at the start was cool and a good intro to the DLC. I enjoyed killing all the hostages for the Counselor of House Kadik, so the head of the house would stop associating with the Zealots once her loved ones were murdered. I enjoyed fighting the undying phantoms at the hidden lab at the dam. They were really sassy and putting them down felt good. And the last mission was fun to play, especially when the Zealots attacked and it became a war zone in the temple. With all the positives out of the way, there were some negatives though, like how Bethesda wrote the highly distrusting Varun people to trust your words pretty easily when you said you can hear Nasco their leader, when no one else could. Spoiler ahead, how Bethesda didn't flesh out the Varun great houses enough, so when it came time to choose a new speaker, after you stop in Nasco, I didn't know who was who, so I had to Google them to remember. And lastly, I felt no emotion whatsoever when the Great Serpent Crusade twist came at the end with Nasco. Honestly, it was predictable. Varun is not subtle with its religious fanaticism at all, so the idea that the leader wanted to do another crusade was not out of this world. I bring up both good and bad points in the main story. Wasn't terrible in my opinion. I also won't call it great either. The main story is just acceptable, and honestly that's good enough for me, because again, I don't play BGS games for the writing, I play it for the sandbox and the dungeon delving. I did enjoy the side quests more though. Some quest highlights for me were the two brothers duel, the old man and his lost granddaughter, and I also enjoyed the trader quest. I will say as a negative though, it was weird to have a horror mission when you are looking for the missing person Quazim, and he just ended up being a redeemed enemy. I had already eliminated a bunch of redeemed at that point, so it killed the horror atmosphere for me when I saw it running around messing with me, because something isn't scary when you are familiar with it. With how much better Bethesda is at making side quest content and faction content, I kinda wish they would just scrap the idea of a main quest from their games, because they are always the worst part for me personally. Like, the idea of Constellation is just kinda lame, and the execution in the game is lame too. It's just a rock collector's club until you arrive and actually get stuff done. Now, past writing, The next thing that I want to talk about is the exploring, aka dungeon delving. We do have some new POIs that are not in the base game, especially in the Varun-Kai world tile. The dungeons were nice to explore, unique, and for $30, I think they added an adequate amount for the price tag. But I wish we saw a procedural / randomized dungeon system. Once you see and do everything in the Varun-Kai world tile, it goes back to the old Starfield problem of seeing the same dungeon over and over. I also think it'd be fine if they just added more POI / dungeons in the available pool of dungeons that can spawn when you travel to random planets and moons. And I think a good system to look at would be like the Bloodborne Chalice dungeons. The system itself doesn't have to be fancy, it just needs to mix up the dungeons a little bit. And of course, having a bigger pool of dungeons that it can mix up would obviously be better. In terms of the new weapons and clothing, I think it's nice what we got. I kind of wish we got new Varun ship parts and a new Varun style vehicle, probably one with tighter steering than the Rev 8, but oh well. What I really want to see in Starfield is drivable mechs and a robot creator, like we have in Fallout 4 with power armor in the Mechanist DLC. And I'm not saying the mech suit and the robot workstation has to work the exact same like Fallout 4's power armor and robot workstation, but I find it really weird how the game set in the post-apocalypse has sci-fi stuff that the sci-fi game doesn't. Especially since mechs are in the game as background pieces in the Vanguard Museum and Mech Graveyard. And we do have robots in Starfield, so it's a shame we are stuck with Vasco as is. Also, the vehicle selection is really bare, and I hope we get a vehicle builder like we have a ship builder, even if it's more bare bones than the ship builder itself. I want to remove the lasers on the Rev 8 and add a minigun like it's a Warthog from Halo. Like I said earlier, the DLC is alright. It's not as good as the Shivering Isles from Oblivion, the Pit in Fallout 3, Dragonboard in Skyrim, or even Morrowind's Blood Moon DLC. But if you like Starfield and want more content, then Shattered Space is for you, and you should get it, preferably when it's on discount like I did. On the other hand, if you hate Starfield and you were just curious about Shattered Space, then don't bother because it's just more Starfield. It doesn't change how you play the game, and it does not improve in the writing department at all. It's just like the base game. So I would recommend skipping it and wait for the Elder Scrolls 6 or Fallout 5, which will come out in 2077 when the nukes drop. If you liked the video, let me know in the comments why. I am 100% right all the time and never wrong. You're welcome I made the video, and...
I'm sorry, sir. It's time for you to leave.